So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for March 10th, 2022. We'll follow the agenda that we had in the issue in the TSC repo, which is issue number 1184. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? Okay, so I think there's no announcements this week. In terms of CPC and board meeting updates, I guess there's no board meeting updates. The last CPC meeting was a working session, and the thing that we worked on was related to the community fund and a proposal that we use some of that, probably a pretty small amount, for awards once a year at OpenJS World. And you can take a look at what that looks like, comment, and so forth, if you're interested in this particular PR, which documents some of the details. So I paste that in the chat. I can get back to the chat. And I'm just going to put that in the minutes. Okay, so if there's no questions or comments on that, we can move on to the issues tagged for the agenda. And we're going to kick off by starting with talking about the issue related to a built-in test runner that is number 40954. So I think, Colin, you put that on the agenda. So if you want to take that away.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, the issue is about whether Node should ship a built-in test runner. Dino, also ships a built-in test runner now, so there's a little more precedent for it. I think it makes sense. A lot of projects, if you're trying to avoid a lot of npm dependencies, you still end up having to npm install a test runner. So it'd be nice if Node kind of offered a minimal one out of the box. And so the discussion on that issue seems to be in agreement that we should offer some sort of test runner. And I think the agreement was that it should be kind of a minimal custom built one. But then there's also been some discussion on Twitter where people are advocating for we should ship, insert your favorite test runner here. And so there's the issue in question here has some engagement from TSC members. I know myself, James, I think Rich has been involved. I can't remember anyone else. But so I just wanted to bring it up to the TSC before I personally invest, more time in it, to decide if building a custom one is what we want to do. But yeah, so that's kind of the discussion point.
How much size, like one of the concerns might be like, hey, we're adding to the size. How much size do we think it would add to the?
So that I think would depend on how feature rich we want to make it. So what I currently have is pretty minimal. I think I'd be ready to start making a couple pull requests with probably less than 1,000 lines and changes. But the more features you add, like for example, I looked on the npm page and tap is like almost 30 megabytes, which I think we don't want to include.
Right. Okay.
Miles has his hand up.
Yeah, hello. So I love the idea of a test runner. I guess a question that I would have would be for reporters, right? Like there's so many different output reporting structures we could use, whether it be like, JUnit or tap. Are we going to just pick one and bless it, or are we going to have multiple reporters for this?
So the discussion so far in the issue has been, people seem to agree, well, let's just output tap. And then the way I have currently written it so far is it basically gives you a readable stream that generates tap. So you can take that and convert it to, whatever other format you'd want.
That seems very reasonable to me. It's tap that we like. I would say a good smell test would be is like we are the first customer of this, so that's what we use in CI. So that makes a ton of sense, and that I think would be a good way to go forward. And maybe we could look at dog fooding this in the various other repos that we have. I know like Sitgem, for example, has a test suite, and various other repos. We could try utilizing this.
So if tap is, I'd go back to like, if tap is 30 meg, do we think this is like 10 meg, 1 meg kind of size? Just a guesstimate is what I'm trying to understand.
Oh, I would say far under 1 meg at this point.
Okay.
Because we're not pulling in any external dependencies. It's all everything is coming from core itself. There's no new third-party things or anything like that.
What about code coverage? Is there anything for that?
At this point, no, but that's been discussed on the issue as well. That's something we would want. I think we would probably want to incorporate something like C8 into core somehow. But I'm just not that far along yet. But if anyone else wanted to explore that, more power to them.
So Isaac may be a good person to hit up about this. I was just recently talking to him about some of the exploration in TAP where they want to be dropping the use of NYC. And V8 does have built-in capabilities for this now, but it like reports everything. So there may be some like V8 related changes that we need to make to do this properly.
Yeah,
there's an open issue on that.
Exactly. I think he actually just closed it and referred to an issue in V8 for it. But yeah, Isaac has seen the proposal and has also started opening some related issues on the issue tracker as far as like mocking and code coverage and things like that.
This may be a dumb question. Would it be possible to have something which is just like, instead of inventing a new thing, a really stripped down version of TAP? That's still that under 1 megabyte. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but I just wonder, like, is it possible to get something super minimal but not invent something new?
It's probably possible. I'm not familiar enough with all the third-party dependencies and whatnot inside of TAP that would have to wade through. That's also something I'm not putting my hand up to do. But I guess that would be theoretically possible. So Tobias put in the chat, would the test runner have a tap-like assertion interface? My thoughts were bring your own assertion module. So use Node's built-in assert module. That's at least where my head was at. And also, if you look through the issue, at one point I linked to a development branch that I have of my own. You can see what the state of the code currently is as well, if you have any questions about that. And I'm happy to answer any questions too. I guess if nobody has any other comments, I guess I will work under the assumption that it's been brought to the TSC, and I'm gonna try to move forward with building something out. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah.
Thank you for driving this work. It's a really great improvement.
Okay, so I just taking some notes there. Okay, well, we'll go back to the issues tagged on the agenda then in the order that they were tagged. The first one was grant triagers the ability to rerun a failed CI. This is 42125.
I added the TSC agenda label to this issue. So basically this was to provide a mean to the triager's ability to rerun a failed CI. The issue is overloaded with a number of additional suggestions, such as needing some dedicated effort to deflate the CI itself, the scope of the triaging role between triage work versus a collaborator intern, and the current ability to run the fresh CI, is it a side effect or it's an intentionally provided capability to the triagers, renaming the triaging team, and so many other things. But the key aspect for which I actually added the TSC label is to discuss and agree on a policy. That is, should the triagers be able to run the CI at all? If yes, to what level, what scope, whether should be able to run the fresh CI or should be able to run resume CI and things like that.
What's the security implications of that? I mean, in CI, we have this checkbox that says you're sure that it's nothing harmful against when you're starting the CI.
Yeah. So traditionally, when we provide access to anybody on the CI infrastructure, practically they can do many things. They can alter many different jobs. They can change the configuration of the jobs and things like that. But when we are talking about access to the triages, we are talking about the access through the labels, because originally the labels is what the triages have access to. And with the invention of CI, I forgot the actual label name, trigger CI, then triages are able to kickstart the CI. So that way, I don't see any security implications. If at all it gets abused, it will be in the form of repeatedly running the CI and somehow causing an overload to the underlying systems.
I think that original, like the checkbox was, you could submit a PR that potentially had something malicious in it. But it only matters if you can run the CI on it, right? Was kind of where I think it came from. Because that ends up potentially running the code you've put in on all of our test machines.
Yeah.
Yeah, our build infrastructure is long living. So any bad code that gets run in those environments could have permanent, long lasting effects on our CI infrastructure. Now, our CI infrastructure is air gapped from our release infrastructure, to be very clear. So, and they use different VMs. So the risk is limited to our test infrastructure, but our test infrastructure does have certain credentials in it that could be utilized for evil. I don't think they have like push access or anything, but we could maybe do an audit of that and make sure that we're comfortable with it. And it might be worth just kind of like, auditing or augmenting. Read access is like, I think even if it has read access to some private stuff, there's nothing we have going on that's so private it's an issue in the main repo. So we should just make sure that it doesn't have write access to things that it shouldn't. And then I personally wouldn't see a problem.
Okay.
I guess that answers. I can't really see any other reason why triagers shouldn't be able to start or restart CI.
Yeah, I'd add that our triagers are still nominated and approved, right? So they're not people that we don't know at all. So it seems like the risk should still be fairly low.
I think the only concern that I could see there being, right, is that triagers don't necessarily have the in-depth technical knowledge of the platform in the same way a collaborator might. But I think if we want to be pragmatic about it, how much in-depth review do we think people always do? And there's all sorts of tricks people can do for social engineering. And I think we need to, if we approach this from zero trust, we should just lock down our infrastructure so that there isn't like really, really bad stuff that could happen aside from damaging the infrastructure and wasting people's time. And then that could allow us to like open the doors to like more trusting these triagers to run stuff, because these systems don't have access to anything.
So it doesn't sound like anybody's arguing for us not to give them access, right?
Is there consequences when we lock CIs and unlock CIs to have several group of people to add to it? Don't know if someone is familiar with this process. I've read a comment about this.
Yeah, well, I think in this case, they wouldn't have access through Jenkins, just the ability to add or remove labels. So I think, I guess we may already have to be being locking them out if they have any level of access. If you know what I mean. Like, I guess we'd have to go look at that, but I think the answer is going to be nothing more than we need to do today.
At a high level, I think where I'm landing on this is like any problems that we have are actually infrastructure problems, not trust problems with these people. And maybe it's worth doing like a review of our build infrastructure and what access it has, but that should be fixed independent of what we do with the triagers.
I concur. Does anyone actually have any other objections than auditing the security around it?
So just something I'm not sure I understand. If we are not giving them access to Jenkins, they already have access to adding labels, so they can request CI. I'm not sure I understand what we're discussing here.
I think the discussion was that may have been accidental as opposed to intentional. Like, we gave them access to add labels to be able to triage, not to start the CI. So I think it came up in the discussion of should we let them rerun the CI or whatever. They're like, people were like, oh, wait a sec, did we mean to let them run the CI in the first place when we gave them access to the labels? Is that right, Jarish?
Yeah, that's right. In the current context, there are two questions. One is, ability to run CI. Did it come accidentally? If at all it came accidentally, are we okay with that? Number two, if it is okay, I mean, in theory, they should also be able to rerun the CI, just like they're able to run the fresh CI. And right now, we don't have a capability or a label to do that. We have to go through Jenkins workflow. We don't want to open up that for triagers. So if we get the answer for the first question right, second one is just an implementation detail, which Richard has some pointers to help with.
I think on that one, though, I think there is a slightly different discussion of like, do we have expectations for rerunning the CI? Like, I would be, if we basically had the expectation that before you reran the CI, you look to see if there were issues open for failures, then I'd be like, yeah, well, absolutely. Otherwise, I kind of understand the issue of we don't want to just rerun the CI until it passes every single time necessarily without opening issues or looking at what failed, because that means it'll perpetually be broken and flaky like that.
Yeah, but that may be a bit difficult to answer because depending on the individual skill level, ability to diagnose problems on the face of it versus needing to look at so much of data, it will vary from person to person.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of diagnosing, but it's like, is there an issue open for that test that failed?
I feel this can backfire in two different ways. Like the first way is if you make it too difficult to do things, then people will just stop doing them rather than going through the steps that is required. And the second thing is we might get a lot of spam issues of known flakiness, etc., that we have to administrate through.
That is, yeah, that's certainly the flip side. I mean, the argument might then be, why don't we just automatically rerun it 3 times, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, if the first CI fails, try one or more attempts by default.
I wouldn't mind that. And then, should we add some kind of a flaky label if it failed the first time we ran it, and then the second time it succeeded, then we can add a label to the PR that says flakiness.
I think you'd want to, like, if we could automatically open an issue and say this test is flaky, that would be interesting, perhaps.
I still think opening issues is a risk of just spamming things. If somebody wants to take a look at spamminess, I think it would be rather easy to just sort by, filter by PR and label flaky, and then investigate those flaky stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It may be a spam, plus in many cases it's a over usage of the resources as well. If there is a percentage of workload that is run by default and not producing enough result versus a human, however, less skilled in the Node.js internals they may be, but looking specifically at an issue or a CI failure and make a calculated decision, okay, this one looks like it's worth rerunning. Probably that's little more beneficial in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also like even them looking to say, like, does it look like we've got this issue? Because we did have like a team CI day a month or so ago. And like, I think what I feel out of that is like, unless there's issues open, they're totally ignored, the flakes. People just rerun. Whereas, I went through and opened a bunch of issues, and at least some of those were investigated.
Okay.
Right. Like if we just leave them to be flaky and never create an issue, they'll just stay flaky in there. If they're obviously a hardware issue or something, then that one doesn't make sense. And that's where, like you were saying, like a person can look at that and say, make a judgment call. Like, this looks like, oh yeah, it was just a machine flake. It failed in the middle of the run. I'm going to rerun it, passes, right? Whereas some other ones, they look like the test actually failed, right? And you can look at the test and say, oh, this is a flaky test. Yeah, let's open an issue for it.
I think we're taking this issue in the wrong place. I don't think test flakiness should have any relevance in PRs. Actually, it should be there. We should just rerun them. We should have some kind of task on master that run a CI on master and see if that's flaky. And that's where we should be sorting out flakiness, not in different PRs that doesn't really actually have anything to do with the flakiness.
That would be good. Just not sure it's ever going to happen. We have like our nightly runs, which would, I think, be equivalent. And I don't know that those get very actively triaged.
I think Rich did for a period. He was trying to make the CI non-flaky somehow with some workflow. I don't know.
Yeah, it's more like you can have a heroic effort by one person, but like if we just let it be that, hey, I can land my thing ignoring all the problems, we end up with ignoring the problems, I think, other than the people who occasionally say, okay, I'm going to make an effort.
Yeah, but those problems, the flakiness problems, are usually not related at all to the PR that is trying to land.
I agree with that. I just like the bar of saying, okay, I'm trying to get my own PR landed.
Yep.
If there's two failures, I typically try and go and say, okay, is there an issue? Yep. Okay, I'll restart it. If not, I'm going to create an issue. And yeah, it's a balance. Like we can do nothing. I'm just not sure. I think if we do nothing, we end up with a bunch of flakiness, and our CI is always flaky, and we don't even have issues that people could investigate because they're not documented anywhere.
But Tobias made a comment, something, do we have some kind of warning system for CI reliability already? Like, or aren't we already doing something?
I can tell you that, again, that was very useful in the CI Green Day we did as a team, like as the Red Hat Node team. But I don't think there's anybody who looks at that regularly and tries to resolve things or anything.
And then how is it different if we make issues?
Because the issues are actually tagged to specific tests and areas and stuff. And sometimes people actually start to look at those. We're maybe a bit off track here. In terms of triagers, like we shouldn't necessarily have any higher expectations than the rest of the team. But so maybe
you can have some guidelines, if it makes sense, please create an issue.
So maybe back to the CI side, the triager side of things. Anybody have any, like, I guess we said nobody argued against giving them CI access. The second question was like, is anybody concerned with giving them the ability to restart CI?
I have no objection to that. A question though is, they already have access to run the CI, and we discussed that we wanted to do some form of security audit. Do we want to remove their access until we've done that, or do we just let them have it and then just do the security audit or whatever is needed sooner rather than later? Or how big of an issue do we think that is?
I don't think we need to block anything for right now, personally. Like it's been working fine for right now. I don't hear anyone saying I'm going to run and go do the audit this afternoon. And I think it could both be demoralizing to have things taken away that you were able to do. And I don't think it's fair to do that to our volunteers for something that we're not going to be having a timeline on doing.
Sounds good to me.
So I guess if anyone wants to champion making a label to resume the CI, it would be welcomed. But maybe their effort would be better on making the CI less flaky. Maybe that would be my position.
So I think basically we're lined up to, if somebody wants to volunteer to add the resume CI, there's no objection to that.
Okay.
And I agree 100% that any cycles that people have to make the CI less flaky is great. But it does take, I think, like a concerted effort or something that helps to sort of make it part of, it either needs like concerted efforts or somehow, you know, a little bit of tax every time you're doing the other work. One of those two are going to be needed to really change it. Because we don't have like somebody we can say, hey, it's your job to go make this green, right?
So if I understand correctly, it's a combination of the knowledge about the test case plus the platform knowledge plus the test harness, that's the Python script. Am I correct?
In terms of the individual flakes, it all comes down to what it is that's failing or not.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes you can add value by tracking down like, okay, who changed the test last? Or who knows about that? Like, for example, you know, one of the ones that I opened an issue for was related to the recursive removed error. So I kind of pinged the tooling team and said, hey, we're getting these pervasive failures. Anybody, you know, can you take a look? Otherwise, you know, maybe I'm just going to exclude it for now. And in the end, then we you know, I think Ben Co took a look and fixed it and, you know, got the test working. So that's kind of thing where, you know, people can invest some effort without necessarily fixing it, but also help bringing focus to it.
Okay.
And I think like if we're thinking triagers, it is something that, you know, they could potentially help with, right?
Yeah.
So I think you said there were a number of questions. I think we've answered two of the questions there in terms of like, is it okay to give CI access and to resume CI? Any other questions we should talk on that one?
I don't think so, because those are transactional questions, not necessarily related to the policy. For example, does the triage team, the renaming of the triage team as a collaborator intern make sense? I don't think that needs a TSC discussion. I may be
No,
wrong.
I think unless there's like, you know, lack of ability to close or get consensus, the TSC doesn't need to wade into that necessarily.
Okay. Then the policy itself was the only thing that I needed to bring it here.
Okay,
Thank
sounds
you.
good. So let's move on to the next issue. Well, actually, that's 40817. I think we kind of covered that, which is like add a resume CI label to issues. I don't, but I'll leave it open to like, is there something else people want to add to that discussion? Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to say we already discussed that in the issue related to triagers. Sorry, go ahead, Richard.
I've just joined, so apologies, I had to be in another meeting. I did put a little note in the meeting saying that for this labeling issue, I don't object to the labels. I just wanted to point out that it's going to be a lot more complicated to implement behind the scenes than the existing request CI label. So request CI, you're basically just saying to Jenkins, I want to start a build, but resume requires you to basically find the existing build that you want to resume. So somebody, yeah, the idea is fine that we maybe should add that label, but someone is going to have to put some work in behind the scenes to make it work. It's not a question of cloning what was done for request, and it will automatically work for resuming builds.
Okay, so that's good to know. We basically said, yeah, it's a good idea, but it actually may not happen for a while because it's going to take somebody some real thought to make it work.
And as far as I know, I don't think it requires any more build privileges. So I think it should be doable if it's doable at all, via changes to node core utils. So at the moment, the builds are being triggered via node core utils. So I put some notes in the issue that was linked as to what I think someone would need to do if they were going to try and implement this.
If somebody's willing to implement, Richard, are you happy to mentor or provide some suggestions?
Part of the problem is I don't know if it's possible, because at the moment, starting a CI, there's a Jenkins API endpoint for it, and I don't know if there's an equivalent for Resume, because Resume is provided via one of the plugins we're using, and I don't know if there is a API. So I am willing to help mentor, but I'm not in a position where I could actually tell you that it's even possible. So I guess at worst, maybe someone could be, you could try scraping the pages and firing links off that way, but yeah, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I also wasn't the one who implemented the current code that starts CIs. So I'm basically I've basically been sort of looking over what's there and trying to deduce from that. So I wasn't the original implementer of this. So your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, anything more to discuss on that one, or should we move on to the next issue? Okay, well, we'll move on to the next one, which is rename default branch for master domain. I did take a quick look, and we're actually down to 6 repos, which are build, I18N, node, node.js, snap, and unofficial builds. I poked a couple of them to see if we can move them along. I think the, let's see, build is one that I think, Richard, we still need to figure out what it all would affect. The snap one, I think you volunteered to look at that one, right?
Yeah, I think I've got a reasonable idea in theory, but I've never really fiddled with the snap side of things. But I think in theory, I know what needs to change. And the same with unofficial builds. I think I know what needs to change. Unofficial builds would require some deployment changes as well as the repository being updated.
Right, I commented in that. I think there's a PR for those changes, and if it's just a matter of logging into the machine and making them as well, maybe that's something we can do. I don't know if there's something else besides that, but
no, I think that's it. But it's just
okay.
Also then spending time to make sure that things are working afterwards.
Right. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you and I could spend a half an hour and do that one.
Potentially.
But anyway, there's those, that's what we're down to, and they're the ones that are going to take more effort. So if people, are interested in helping push this over the line, think it's important. These are the big one.
The big one's core, though, isn't it?
Was that
the big repository that we haven't converted is core node.js/node?
Yes, that one's going to be the most complicated, but I think if we get the rest of them, then we can figure out what it's down to. Anyway, that's the last one, but I think if we can get the other 5 that we're down to that one, then we can think about that. Unless somebody wants to start thinking about it now, that would be actually be pretty good. Anything more people want to add on that one? If not, the next issue is number 182, email cleanup tracking. I think, Rich, you added it to the TSC label. Do you want to?
Did I? Let me see. I'm not looking at the right screen. Let me see. There's something we can go on to and come back to this one. I'm going to pull it up right now and try to get my head wrapped around.
I will move on to the next one. So the next one is nominating Antoine as a moderation team member. I assume
that was also me. That's just that was open for 72 hours. Nobody objected. So Antoine and I should probably schedule an onboarding or something there might not even need to be an onboarding session actually, but yeah, I need to go through the onboarding checklist and make that happen. And thank you, Antoine.
Yes, thank you very much for taking that on. Okay, the next one
So
is
back
public- go ahead.
So do we want to go back to email
Yep,
cleanup?
okay,
Oh, yeah.
let's go back to cleanup. Yep.
Yeah. So this is just a bunch of things that need to happen in the email stuff. And why did I add TSC agenda? Just informational. Seems like if we're going to be making significant change, like getting rid of the CTC emailing list, for example, which I think we already did. It seems like, people should know that that's happening. So that's all. There isn't anything on here to discuss, I don't think. And no decision to be made today, just for information purposes. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the TSC agenda label at this time.
Sounds good. Okay. Okay, so that takes us down to publishing spec for buffer and event emitter. So this is 1176. Let's see. I'm just scrolling down, see who might have added it to the agenda. So I guess James added it to the agenda. Possibly we should wait for him to be at the meeting to discuss, unless somebody has some thoughts, wants to discuss.
No, I agree. This is not time sensitive. And unless somebody has burning thoughts they want to share, I think we can just punt this to a time when James can make it.
Okay, we'll move on to the 1165, which is settle on a voting solution. I'm guessing Antoine put this on the list. I think we discussed it in the past. I seem to remember us like saying, let's just go with it.
Yeah, it's still on the agenda because I haven't touched it since. But yeah, it's on my list.
Okay, so I think we can remove the TSC agenda label if that's okay. Does that sound right to you, Antoine?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, label removed.
Perfect. Okay, so the next one on the agenda is bot user for Node.js core pack, number 660.
Teo added it, but also added it a month ago, so we've probably talked about it already, but I don't know where things are at. It's like a new user or org for automation, a proposal from you, Michael, and that Michael Zazo has seconded.
So I don't think anybody's complaining about setting up the automation, right? It's more of, somebody driving the discussion to conclusion of what.
Yeah, just setting it up the right way, basically.
Yeah, like we had a user, but it was never intended to be used for publishing, and it's probably best to figure out and we've had discussions like, should we have an org and all that, so that, this might best drive that versus just using something where it's actually even called NPM Foundation, or I think Node Foundation, which, we've had people say you should rename that. So. Okay, so I don't know that there's any reason to leave it on the TSC agenda unless there's some discussion people think we should have here.
I'm going to take it off, but if someone wants to re-add it, please do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, the next one was the block list import export. This is number 659. I also do remember that we discussed this before. This was just an FYI, I think like a mirroring between the two. And I think Rich, you'd added it maybe. So yeah, you can tell me if I got that right.
You got that right, and I'm taking it off because basically there is nobody's objecting. There's some thumbs up. I'm in favor. And I think it's just a matter of someone, probably Tierney, doing the work to actually make it happen.
Yeah.
And asking for help from the right people. But I don't think there's any reason for it to be on an agenda item. I think it's good to go.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so now that takes us down to the end of the issues tag for the agenda, and we still have a few minutes, so let's flip over to the strategic initiatives. If I can get my mouse to click.
So there's the next 10, which you put the update in the issue for, and then Michael's also put the V8 currency update in the issue.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just quickly going to get there so that I'll have my context. Strategic initiatives.
Pulling them up and copying and pasting them into the.
Sure. Why don't you read Michael's and I can go through the one that I did.
Sure.
So
Michael says, what's that?
Go ahead.
I thought somebody else tried to say something. Okay. On V8 currency, V8 9.9 and later are blocked on a Windows compiler issue. And Michael says that they haven't found any workaround for it yet. And there is a V8 issue in the V8 issue tracker, but no comment on it yet. So if any Windows or V8 people want to take a look at that, don't let me stop you. And that's it.
Okay. Windows, it's knowledge could help out. Okay, yeah, on the next 10, initiative, I'm just gonna go, I'll go back to my notes here. So in the last meeting, a lot of the discussion was around getting ready for the next couple deep dives. So we're planning the next virtual summit on 7th of April on WASM and security. So if people are interested in that, would be great to see you there. And security is in the sense of things like, a security model and policies, as opposed to, our security releases or anything like that. We're also thinking for the OpenJS world that it would be great to have some sessions during the Collaborator Summit. So that's where we planned the ESM and observability as 2 deep dives, as well as we're hoping to, like, if there's a common track, to be able to have something where we introduce the overall, concept and what's being worked to all of the collaborators to get broader visibility on that. Looking back on some of the previous work, since this is the first update, in terms of suitable types, the outcome of that was that we wanted to work towards improving how we can automatically generate our JSON documentation and its contents. And, the next step is to PR in some changes to the style guides. And so that's being worked. In terms of single binary EXEs, we had a great discussion in the mini summit. We came up with what we believe is, the way that Node could support that, but we don't necessarily have a champion to push that forward. So I don't think there's any active work. Something I might try still do is to land somewhere in the repo documenting what the agreement was in terms of, what would make sense. Modern HTTP, one of the key things that came out of that was to land a fetch, which Indici was landed to support that and still being tweaked. There's some discussions around the implementation, but that was a good outcome. And then for documentation, there's a PR I opened just in terms of one of the outcomes from the mini summit discussions about having examples for all of the methods, functions. And then the other thing that was sort of a high priority was to document the metadata and its usage. So those are sort of 2 things that are in the list of work items. So that was the next 10 strategic initiative. And then let's see, do we have anybody from any of the others? I'm looking for Antoine, anything on core promises that you want to mention?
No.
Okay. So on that front, I think that takes us to the end of our agenda. Is there anything else we should talk about before we close out?
Just a note for TSC members that daylight savings time is about to start in the United States. I think this weekend or next weekend. I think this weekend.
It's this weekend.
Which means that it's probably about time to go into the spreadsheet and, you know, change your times if you're going to be affected by daylight savings. Make sure your times are right. If you're not, make sure your time zone is listed correctly there. And maybe by the end of this month or beginning of next month, we'll adjust meeting times as necessary to accommodate people.
Yeah, do people know when in Europe? It's usually 1 or 2 weeks later, I think, that it switches.
You don't need to figure that out right now. I just wanted to just let people know that it's a good time to start thinking about going to the spreadsheet, because I know it's, you know, a tedious task for some people. So
yep. Yeah, definitely by beginning of April-ish, I hope we'll all be switched and we could look at that again. Any other things that we should talk about before we close out? If not, thanks for everybody's time, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.